We want to thank you all for coming on this rather unspring-like day. We have a number of people, though, here who have announcements to make, and I want to take just a few minutes to allow them to speak. Will you raise your hand if you have one? Yes, Fran? Here.
Morning, this is Fran Snedeker, and I don't know about you all, but after I wake up my computer in the morning and get the New York Times daily briefing, I need some soothing for the soul. And I actually have an idea for you. The Westchester Chorale, along with the Westchester Children's Chorus, will be presenting a concert on Saturday at Larchmont Avenue Church with Carl Jenkins, The Peacemakers. And it's all about bringing peace to the world. So please join us, 4 p.m. Saturday at Larchmont Avenue Church. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good morning. As we're all enjoying a delicious breakfast, I want to remind everybody that Mondays in May, next Monday and the following Monday, is Steak Up for Charity at Sedona, in which the Lions are working with Sedona so that your $8 steak will generate $5 of donation to the co-op summer camp for our area's disadvantaged. So next Monday night and the following Monday night, $5 from every one of your $8 steaks. Thank you.
Anybody else with an announcement? We're not going to have tidbits this morning because our tidbit expert is away. So we're going to go right into the program, and I'm going to let Ann McAndrews begin.
Thank you and good morning. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce a new-ish member of our community, and that's the new village manager for the village of Mamaroneck, Jerry Barbario. Very good. Thank you very much. Would you like to say a few words, sir?
This is my first summit, so I'm very nervous. I don't know what to say. But I do want to thank everyone. They have been terrific. They've welcomed me, and it's been a great time so far. And I know that this community, Mamaroneck and the other communities are really fantastic places. So I want to contribute to that as much as possible. Thank you.
Hello. Very good. All right, exhale. I bet housing is one of the most talked about topics by us in this room. From one extreme to the other, from lost tax deductions to housing the homeless, adequate housing for immigrants. This is what we are concerned about on a day-to-day, everyday basis. Now let me tell you, because the subject is so broad and so deep, our committee had a difficult time drilling down to today's topic. But we got lucky. And we got lucky because the village of Mamaroneck has before it several proposals that came out of a study of its housing needs and specifically of its affordable housing needs in the context of the whole village of Mamaroneck. So hence the title of today's program, Housing Needs of the Working Poor. Do we have any local solutions? First of all, some definitions, and you'll find some handouts on your tables. In large measure, housing assistance is controlled by the federal government. And if you're wondering why, that's because that's where the money comes from. And it has definitions of affordability that tunnel all the way down to the county level, to the town level, and to the village level. Are there any problems with those definitions? You have some handouts with some grids. It's about a 4-step process to find out proper eligibility for what we will call affordable housing. Roughly, affordability of one's home is if a homeowner is paying no more than 30% of their income to housing costs. So we get to the question. And what are we doing about our working poor? Do we have any solutions? What has happened with programs in the past? What can we look for in the future? Is there anything we can do about this? Hence, we have our fabulous panel. First, Norma Drummond, who is the Westchester County Commissioner of Planning. She's sort of the grande dame of housing. I've known Norma for several years in many professional capacities, and she's always done a terrific job. Thank you very much for coming all the way down from Up County. Anna Denoy is familiar to many of us. She is the Town of Mamaroneck Director of Community Services, Senior Programs, and Housing. And she will be able to zero in on the town-wide situation. Then we have Greg Cutler, who is the Mamaroneck Village Planner, and he will address the proposals presently before the Village of Mamaroneck for encouraging the availability of housing. I'm going to ask each to speak for about 10 minutes, and when I stand up, then you could sit down. And after all three, we will have a question period, because there's a bit of overlap here, and I think it's nice to know that all three of our panelists work very well together, I hope. And with that, thank you very much. Norma.
Good morning, everyone. As I warned Ann before, when I agreed to come, I always never know what the Taconic Parkway is going to be like. But today, the Taconic cooperated. In fact, I was here so early, I already was into the office, and then got stuck at Mamaroneck High School. All right, so that's where the traffic was this morning. But welcome. I'm so happy to see that there's so many people excited about affordable housing. It is certainly a topic near and dear to my heart, although these days I have to do a lot more than just housing. But affordable housing is certainly something that Westchester County has been working on for years, okay? Since 1985, we've been devoting our own money, our own bond money, toward making improvements to be able to assist developers in building affordable housing developments here in Westchester. And what do we mean by affordable? Who exactly qualifies for affordable housing? New income limits actually came out just about 2 weeks ago. And as of April 24th, a family of four earning $120,000 a year qualifies for affordable housing in Westchester County. All right, that's at 80. That's 100% of the median income. So the family who would qualify for the county's ownership programs is allowed to earn up to 80% of that. A family of four can earn $96,250,000. Now, if you think about the average house in Westchester, we are back up to $650,000 a year as the median sales price. $96,250 is not going to buy that house that's worth $650,000. So there certainly still is a gap of affordability. And right now, the county has been working since last fall on a new housing needs assessment. It's going to be the first one we've done since 2004. It will be released shortly. We're just kind of fine-tuning some of the details within it right now. But we're excited because this new housing needs assessment is so chock full of data. It's the first time we've actually seen ETPA data. If anybody, the communities that have ETPA know how hard it is to get that data out of HCR. But it's also, it goes into all sorts of issues, but it will look at each municipality to let you start that conversation about what does it mean to be affordable in the town of Mamaroneck, in the village of Larchmont, in the town of Bedford, in the town of North Salem. It's going to let each municipality really start to have that conversation. So we're really excited that that study is almost complete at this point, and it will be released shortly. But that's certainly not the only thing that we're excited about here in the county. Under George Latimer's leadership, the new county executive, we were able to restart our consortium, the Urban County Consortium. We now have 25 municipalities who have re-enrolled, yes, for those of you who worked with us before. This consortium, in its first 35 years, brought in $182 million just of CDBG money that we were able to redirect into the municipalities, particularly those that had the highest portions of low and moderate income persons, to be able to help you do sidewalk improvements and streetscape improvements and water and sewer lines that nobody even gets to see, but you all know how important it is to get those improvements within your towns. So we've reestablished a consortium. We've got 25 municipalities. We believe 2 more are working on their paperwork right now to join for next year. But we're really excited. Our first grant has now been awarded to us, $3.5 million just under this program. And then also, as part of the consortium, HUD has now also awarded us $880,000 to be able to toward our affordable housing program, the home program. So we're going to actually have some real money to start being able to work with developers again on construction of affordable housing, not just the county's resources, which go toward buying land and infrastructure improvements. But there's definitely still a need out there. Everywhere you look, young people, older people who want to be able to downsize. My last one just came home from her first year of college. It's just on Friday. I got so used to not having children in the house, and suddenly they're back. But you know, the good thing is when these kids can go and afford to go out on their own and live on their own. They can't, they all can't do that these days. So many households in the last 10 years have found it necessary to move back in with mom and dad. And we are at the point in our lives where we want to downsize. I don't need that 4-bedroom house anymore. I'm ready to move into something a little bit smaller. But, again, until they're all out the door, you can't quite do that. So, but there's not that supply in Westchester of the smaller homes. And that's really what we really need to focus our efforts on continually. Working with developers every single day, constantly getting those phone calls. I'm thinking about doing affordable housing. Okay, what does it mean? What are you thinking of? Is it rental? Are you thinking ownership? And it's always, well, what do we need? We need everything, all right? We need from the studio and 1-bedroom apartments to the 5-bedroom houses. I mean, there is such a need in this county for all sorts of opportunities, diverse opportunities. No family is the same. My family is 6, well, now 7, because my oldest son has gotten married. But we're very different than the family down the street, that's only got 1 child. So there are so many different needs of housing that it's not just a one-size-fits-all. Any opportunity where we can work with municipalities and with developers to create affordable housing, there's nothing wrong with, well, it's only going to be 1 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms, or you know what, it's going to be 3 bedrooms and 4 bedrooms. We need all sorts of opportunities. At the county, we have been working with a number of the municipalities on what we call the model ordinance provisions, and Larchmont has adopted those down in Mamaroneck. It's under the housing settlement. Which, by the way, let me give you a quick update because I filed another quarterly report yesterday. The housing settlement, we are not done. We are almost done. We just have to get the monitor to sign off on everything. But of the 750 units that we were required to build, 700 of them are done, completed. Most of them are occupied. There's another 93 that have deed restrictions filed on them. So I really have 793 units that actually have the deed restrictions filed. They're under construction. I have a total of 884 that I'm reporting on at this point. So we're well over where we need to be. But again, until the monitor actually gives us that final say-so, we're not quite done. But as part of the housing settlement, we were required to provide model ordinance provisions to the municipalities to be able to consider to adopt so that we could standardize the conversation so that somebody who thinks they need affordable housing in one municipality can go next door where they might be building it, know that they still qualify. There's a lot of municipalities, particularly in northern Westchester, that had different definitions of affordable housing based on the average of the salary of the employee, or, there were all sorts of different definitions there. Standardize the conversation. This way, clients can find the housing that they need. The developers know what they're building. They can go to the state to be able to qualify for other programs and other subsidies to build it so that the burden doesn't rely just on the county to help fund these programs. And so at this point, we now have 20 of the municipalities, 20 of the 31 eligible municipalities that have adopted the model ordinance provisions, Larchmont and Lewisboro being actually the last two that actually adopted them. So we're very excited that we're really starting to standardize that conversation. And we think going forward, we're actually going to work with the municipalities. I'm wearing my planning commissioner hat now. We're going to create more of these model ordinances, not just related to affordable housing, but the next one we're going to actually work on this year is accessory apartments. Not all municipalities have accessory apartments, but it's an opportunity, particularly for those of us who have a 4-bedroom house and, you know, children not living there all the time, to potentially consider subdividing or splitting the house a little bit, reconfiguring, and having somebody else move in and providing an affordable housing opportunity there. But there are 13 or 14 municipalities right now that have model or that have accessory apartment or accessory dwelling unit provisions, and they are all over the place. Some are good for a year, some are good for 3 years, some for 5 years. Some can't be in an accessory building, some can be in an accessory building, some can't be no more than 50% of the size of the house. They're all over the place. So that's one of the next things we're actually going to work on this year is a model ordinance related to accessory apartments. And we're going to continue looking at these. How can we really start to assist the municipalities so that we can provide them things to think about as they move forward with ordinances? One of the newest things that we've seen out there is something called esports. Who would have thought that people go and watch people play video games? But it's a big thing, believe it or not. And so providing municipalities and some model ordinance to the municipalities about how do they prepare and plan for and provide enough parking and other things related to that. So it's a big, wide world out there. Westchester is amazing in terms of all of the different topics that we see that come here and things that are happening here that you don't necessarily see in every municipality. And so being able to work between the municipalities and assist them all, learning from what's worked in one place that might work well in another, it's certainly been an interesting challenge. But as I said earlier, affordable housing, we're not done. Every opportunity is something for us to consider. So I could talk all day, but I'm not going to. And Anne's standing up, so we're going to pass it on.
Thank you very much. The Village of Larchmont zoning code allows boarding houses, believe it or not. I think it's probably a very old statute, but it does come up every so often and say, hey, why is that happening? Accessory apartments was something I think that the League of Women Voters looked at about 20 years ago, and it does have some issues with it. It sure does. Parking being numero uno on the list. With that, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Anna Denoy and to tell us a little bit about what the whole town of Mamaroneck does. Now, her office is of community services, and she takes care of programs, for example, what we call the Section 8 housing program for all 3 municipalities. And how many of Section 8s are there? Over 600?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here today. Okay, that's better? Okay, I'm not good at this. There's some good news here and some not so good news. We have a lot of affordable, what's the matter? Like this? Yeah. I don't do this very often, sorry. Okay, we have a lot of options and a lot of affordable housing that's been built in the tri-municipal area, Larchmont Mamaroneck and the town. And that's the good news. But the bad news is that the need is so great that when we opened our Section 8 housing voucher program in November of 2017, we got 10,143 applications. Thankfully, we did it online, so we don't have boxes and boxes of paper. But it's really difficult in this economy and with the cost of housing for people just starting out to find a place and to be able to afford the to buy anything. So one of the things I really wanted to discuss was what we actually have available in the town that is affordable. And within the village of Larchmont, let me start with the town because it's a little fresher in my mind. We have the Homix Park Apartments, which were built in the late 80s, 90. Okay, you're better than you remember everything, Norma. There are 54 units there of what was, or 53 actually, which were entitled sort of workforce housing units. They're consistently occupied. There are 13 apartments there that were set aside for people with a housing choice voucher, and the vouchers are administered by our office, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The Cambium, which is down by Maxwell Avenue and the Thruway entrance, has 10 units of workforce housing there as well. And in that building, there are 2 two-bedroom apartments and 8 one-bedroom apartments, and they're limited to people who make no more than 80% of the median household income for Westchester County. So the rents are calculated based on that, and so people are paying approximately $2,200 for a one-bedroom apartment plus all the utilities, and $2,800 a month for a two-bedroom apartment. The waiting list has been active and very long, and we constantly get applications for that because it's a wonderful building. They have the benefit of all the amenities there, but it's still 10 units is really not a lot of housing. Pinebrook Condominiums in the village of Larchmont was built quite a number of years ago, 51 one and two bedroom affordable condos. 2015, I think it was occupied. There's a new proposal in the village of Larchmont also called Central Larchmont, which is proposing 26 apartments at 108 to 114 Chatsworth Avenue. With 3 affordable housing units, I have that too, and also a parking deck, which will be coming in handy. One of the other things about housing for senior citizens in particular is something called the Senior Citizen Rent Increase Exemption. If you're living in a building that is under rent stabilization, so the buildings on Larchmont Acres, a lot of the units there, if you're a senior citizen and you want to be able to have your rent not go up every year, we provide assistance to fill out the application that goes to the Division of Housing and Community Renewal in Westchester County, and you could get your rent stabilized and not have rent increases year after year as long as you qualify. There's an income limit for that too. The annual household income has to be at or below $33,000 in the village of Larchmont and $35,000 in the town of Mamaroneck and the village of Mamaroneck. You're looking confused. It is low. It should. We need to talk about that. We do take appointments for people who are interested in applying for that, and you can just call our office, 381-7840. The biggest opportunity that we do have here, though, is the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. We have 647 vouchers. The waiting list, as I said, was tremendous. And what we're really struggling with is being able to find apartments that the voucher will be eligible for. And right now, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Mamaroneck and Larchmont is about $1,750, and there are very few apartments listed at $1,750. So my mic just cut out. Okay, so we're really interested in trying to figure out a way to work with the local landlords to introduce the program and to really be able to find more opportunities for people in our community to be able to live here and enjoy the benefits of the community, especially people who grew up here and, again, can't afford to buy a house, but at least they might be able to stay in the area. And I think the last thing that I really wanted to talk about is, with regard to the landlords, is, we're guaranteeing the vast majority of that rent to the landlord. So if you're willing and you have a rental property to rent to someone, you can't discriminate against source of income in Westchester County. So a voucher is considered source of income. There are, Social Security, disability, all of those things are considered source of income. But we're basically paying the vast majority of that rent. So you have a guarantee that we're going to work with that client, we're going to work with that landlord, and we're going to be paying the substantial portion of that rent. And if anybody has any questions or needs more information about this, again, we can call the office, and I'd be happy to go over anything with you all. Thank you.
Last night, there was a very late meeting before the Village of Mamaroneck Board of Trustees concerning a report that the village planner, Greg Cutler, worked on, put together, and it's ink intensive, I'll tell you, printing that. What's fascinating about this report is that it looks at what all the good efforts have been for the past 20, 30 years for affordable housing and what has happened. And some of the results have been a bit shocking, and it goes to the question of what are local solutions, not only to a newer problem every day, but what has the legislation been in the past and how can it be improved. And what the Village of Mamaroneck is doing is looking at the status quo and seeing what can be done about it. You have on the tables certain pages of last night's submission to the Board of Trustees. There are longer reports that can be found on the Village of Mamaroneck website. And with that, we welcome, as a panelist, sort of a newbie, Greg Cutler. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Good morning. So first, let me provide some context because this report really is an additional supplemental analysis to what we're calling the moratorium study. Essentially, the Village of Mamaroneck had issued a moratorium on developments that involve 3 or more residential units or 3 or more lots being subdivided. And what we looked at were impacts relative to school enrollment, relative to infrastructure, looking at the sewage treatment plant. How can we deliver water to the village if we see the full build out of our zoning code as it exists now? So being cognizant of changes that were forthcoming to the zoning code, which are proposed and were the reason we were up till midnight last night, and somehow I still made it here, and other, members of our board, elected officials are here as well, is because that law was being reviewed, and we had a lot of good stakeholders, a lot of our local nonprofits come out to discuss that, and essentially being cognizant of the fact that the zoning code is going to be changed, and there's likely going to be a reduction in the overall residential capacity. We needed to look closely at where affordability fit into all of this, because we didn't want to necessarily negatively impact the production of affordable housing, and certainly didn't want, and certainly don't want to, because this is still kind of a dynamic situation. So we look forward to more feedback. Necessarily influence the existing affordable housing we have now, whether that be actually regulated affordable housing or housing that happens to be affordable by way of its existing condition, its age, things like that. So we did this analysis, and essentially we looked at all the different factors that influence housing affordability. We looked at the incomes and rents from 1990. We found that in the Village of Mamaroneck, rents have risen 40% faster than incomes since 1990. More than half of households are rent burdened, and of that half of households that are rent burdened means 30%, you're paying more than 30% of your income towards rent. More than half of those rent burdened households were severely rent burdened, which means they're paying more than 50% of their income towards housing. We also noted that the production of below market rate housing had declined by 96% since the 1990s. And that a lot of the housing that was created with these very short-term kind of sunsetting clauses that were about 20 years, and a lot of that has been converting over to market rate. And we've seen a lot of that in the past couple years, really. So we've lost about 41% of our preserved below market rate housing in the past 5 years. And there's been a lot of changes to the zoning code over time. There's been a lot of other regional issues, maybe not even regional, national concerns that have been affecting the cost of construction, the property values, that make it very difficult to build new housing, and particularly affordable housing. And what we see is when new construction occurs, the rents are going to skew towards the high end because of those high costs of property, the expensive construction costs, the approval process, and the time it takes to get approval. All of those things contribute to higher rents for new construction, which we hope as planners will slowly, as buildings age, those apartments will become less expensive, but we don't know. So that's kind of where we are, and that's what we looked at. So in response to those concerns, we've tried to add in additional protections within the proposed local law to encourage more affordable housing. Now, understanding that this is within the constraints that we already talked about the cost of property. So we did a lot of analysis looking at whether or not creating these below market rate provisions, doing a mandatory below market rate provision, is still even viable. So we looked at the cost of land. We ran a pro forma model. We ran this past nonprofit housing developers to see, really, does this work? Does this not work? And we've arrived at what we think will help, but will not answer and really solve the problem, because it needs to be attacked at all different varying levels. It needs to be, the zoning code needs to work towards it. We need to have, other pieces of zoning legislation, like the idea of accessory dwelling units, to increase supply. Housing is a very difficult to understand market. It doesn't follow the normal supply and demands of the market. Supply and demand do make a difference in housing, but it's not the only piece, because it's not the only thing that makes certain housing attractive. In Mamaroneck, the housing is obviously very attractive. There's good schools, close to the city, and these are things that are going to remain whether the supply increases or not. But it does have an effect. So, you need to try and preserve what you have. So that's the existing housing that is reachable to low incomes. You want to protect tenants as best you can, and really you want to encourage additional production that is preserved for low income tenants. So the new law, we can go into more detail about it. It's trying to be responsive to the concerns that were part of the moratorium, which were related to school enrollment, infrastructure, all of those issues, while also not hurting the production of affordable housing. That's done by making affordable housing mandatory at a rate of 10%, at 80%, which does not reach every income level. And again, we looked at these pro forma analyses and at the FARs, the densities that we're talking about. You can't go any further because it won't. Then no projects will be built. If you require, at a 40% AMI, if you want to check your charts, the rent's going down to say $1,200 a month. If you want to require that, then you're making a project non-viable, which means you get no housing. No affordable housing. So that's really the context that we're working within, and what we've tried to do is encourage and protect existing bonuses for nonprofit housing development in the downtown, and use that as one of the ways to address that deep affordability. But that needs to be coupled with additional things that are not going to be necessarily provided through this law, but still need to be reviewed, and we're doing our best under the context that we're operating. Let's see. So essentially, the law that we have in front of us will reduce the overall residential capacity in the village of Mamaroneck by approximately 33%. It will incorporate mandatory inclusionary. It will create these bonuses. And one of the other aspects of it is, as proposed, so this is not set in stone, is reducing the parking requirements for affordable housing, because that's one of the other expense pieces that is part of the pro forma that any developer is looking at. Is parking is an exorbitant cost a lot of times, especially once you're pushing a project that would be just surface parking into tiered parking. It costs about $35,000 per space for a tiered parking structure. And those are costs that probably don't need to be borne, because the occupants of below market rate housing tend to not need that parking. It's usually the requirements are far too high. We did a kind of mini study in the village of Mamaroneck where I walked my dog every night past one of the Washingtonville Housing Alliance properties and counted the cars for a week straight. And they would have been required to provide 18 parking spaces on this particular property. The planning board in 2007 decided to do what they call land banking. So they land banked 4 parking spaces. Essentially, they let landscaping be in an area that could accommodate 4 spaces. So that brought them down to 14 parking spaces. And on my walks, there were 7 cars there most of the time. So that's kind of the angle we're trying to go, is trying to reduce costs for nonprofit development, for affordable housing, and also achieve the goals that the Board of Trustees have in mind for this moratorium. And we'll see where it goes from here.
As a history buff, I'm always intrigued by old photographs, specifically of New York City, which, by the way, has stupendous archives of old pictures, old tenements, most of them owned by John Jacob Astor, believe it or not. And there's always the question of density. How many people are allowed in an apartment by way of controlling its size? One of the proposals is to change the formula a bit about density for affordable housing. When I first came across that, it kind of surprised me, because of course I thought of John Jacob Astor making bazillions of dollars from pouring as many people as he could into his apartments. So could you please start off by explaining what that proposal is and changing the FAR, or the density for affordable housing that has been proposed, and then suggest any other changes that you would want to see.
I got one. So there actually is no proposal to increase the density for affordable housing. All that this law that's proposed right now is doing is protecting an existing density bonus that's in the downtown. It's a 0.5 FAR bonus, and it allows you to go to 6 stories. However, the planning board is recommending extending that bonus into the Washingtonville neighborhood. But essentially, that's a bonus for projects that are 100% affordable. One of the recommendations that's come out from our land use boards and from the planning department is, on those projects that are 100% affordable, having a minimum requirement for deep affordability, say 10% at 30% AMI or 40% AMI, so reaching income levels that are much lower than the standard 80%, 60% AMI.
AMI being?
Area median income, sorry. We get jargony.
That's on those charts, the grids that you see, and that the average annual income in Westchester County is somehow computed. And then you take the figure of 80% of that, that's the affordability for ownership,
Yeah.
correct?
Or
And then
rental.
it goes down the limit. And
Yep.
then it goes down to 60% for rental. Is that
That's the model ordinance, yes.
That's
but
the model ordinance.
That's not what's proposed in the village law.
Well, what is proposed for the village house that makes it different?
So again, for the 100% projects that are, we expect, funded by nonprofits, it would be a minimum of 10% at 40%, maybe. This is something that we have to discuss with our trustees. And then, we're kind of hoping that it's defined by the LIHTC. And then in the by kind of the funding mechanisms for low-income housing tax credits, we're hoping that the fact that you have to have usually maintaining a 60% AMI average for the mix of units within a development, but you'll see 10% at 40% AMI, you'll see 25% at 60%, and then some at 80%. Just so those projects can actually get financed by the banks. For the rental apartments that are going to be, provided by private developers, that's 80% AMI, so 10% of the building at 80% AMI. And again, the reason for that is because of the pro forma analysis that we did, where we found that at the cost of the properties in the village of Mamaroneck in different areas, we looked at different properties, and at the current construction cost, if we made it 60%, every development would lose money. So that's essentially why we came to that.
And that's what makes it so complicated, is that, we have a certain amount of federal, state, and county subsidies, but you still have the cost of the product. And since we don't want to be John Jacob Astor, we want to be assured that whatever is built and maintained is right and proper. So hence the problem. I'd like to open the floor then for questions.
Good morning. I'm Nancy Seligson, Supervisor of the Town of Mamaroneck, and I want to thank our panel because I know how hard all three of you work at this issue because I try and work with you also. I just want to say in the Town of Mamaroneck, we do have a requirement that any new development has 10% affordable housing in it, and we have been trying for years to look for opportunities to create affordable housing, and it's really, really tough. The land cost is so expensive. That it makes it not viable, as Greg said, to create affordable housing in terms of a developer's point of view. However, we see lots and lots of development going on in our communities, and I have asked everyone in the town of Mamaroneck to look for opportunities for us to try and create affordable housing. But I just wanted to ask for I guess mostly for Greg, because there's a lot of development going on that we see in the village of Mamaroneck. Which properties, if any, have affordable housing components in them?
And Anna could probably answer this too, since she does the administration of those units for the village of Mamaroneck as their shared service, the Town of Mamaroneck Housing Authority. So of the recent developments, we have the one on Mamaroneck Avenue, 690 Mamaroneck Avenue, that has 2 units. There are 2 units that are affordable at 80% AMI. That's out of 21 total units. 422 East Boston Post Road, that's the one across from Mamaroneck Diner. They also have 2 units. And those are really, and also the Mason, the 100 unit apartment building behind Halftime in that area, that has 5 affordable units that were not created through the inclusionary bonus. That was they weren't able to actually max out their FAR on that property because of the parking requirement. So they weren't able to do a density bonus back in 2007 when it was approved. But they made an agreement with the planning board that Washingtonville Housing Alliance would administer 5 units. So that's why there's not 10, which would be the bonus would require 10, or the previous bonus. And the Avalon, I think, has 15? 19. 19.
Grand Street Lofts has 2.
Yeah, that was the first one, yeah.
Grand Street Lofts has 2.
Yeah, that's 690, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
It's okay.
Well,
You couldn't hear any of that? Or? Oh, no, she was just saying that Grand Street Lofts has 2, but that's the one that we mentioned in the beginning.
About the income limitations, is that only for initial eligibility? Let's say someone does a lot of overtime, gets a promotion, gets married, anything like that. What happens then?
It depends on where they live and the program that they're in. But in general, with the Village of Mamaroneck existing affordable housing, they have to make under 80% of median income based on a two-person or four-person household size, but can go up to 120% of median income and still qualify to stay in the apartment.
That's for a rental?
That's for rental.
Now, on purchasing, which is part of the problem that developed in the Village of Mamaroneck, is that you got in, you qualified for the old program. We said you had to give back any gain that you had if you sell the property back to somebody over a period of like 20 years. Well, 20 years seemed like a long time when I was working on Monroe Avenue and those little apartments there. It's over, and that means that people who got there can now sell it at market rate, and therefore the supply has been depleted. Correct? What do we do about that? I'll start with Norma.
That's fine. For ownership, by the way, you only have to qualify, your household has to be income eligible only at this time that you sign the sales contract. Because the hope is once your housing is stable, you're actually going to do better. We want you, stand up, no problem. We want households to do better because the idea is when you've done better, you're generally, the units, the affordable housing that we build, particularly the ownership units, are generally on the smaller side. And so when you've done better and you can afford something more, you generally will move out and move on to something a little bit bigger. We've seen that in the Regatta where some of the one-bedroom people moved in with, a single person or a couple. They had children. They moved out into bigger opportunities because now they had more income in their households. So for ownership, you only have to qualify at that income eligible at the time that you're signing the sales contract. It sounds like what you're talking about was a recapture provision that when the household sold their property, some portion of the proceeds, there's usually a resale formula in the deed restriction. By the way, every single affordable property that the county does has a deed restriction filed on it that is referenced in the face of the deed so that the title companies find these deed restrictions and nobody can move in and say, oh, I didn't know this was an affordable housing unit. Because it's amazing what we found out in the early 2000s about how many people forgot that they were living in affordable housing. All right, that tells you something about how nice it is, but people forgot. Actually, Continental View up the road, a couple owners there forgot that they lived in affordable housing. We found them, okay? Because if you own any other property in Westchester or Putnam, it's filed in the county clerk's office. We found them and actually had to get some of our proceeds back. But we don't do recaptures anymore because for two reasons. Number one, that if you can sell your house for whatever value, then your real estate taxes are based on that whatever the market value is. But instead, by having a restricted resale formula within the deed restriction, it actually limits that your tax value is going to be limited to that resale provision each year. So we actually provide the assessors each year with those resale provisions annually adjusted so that they know what the appropriate tax rate is for each of these properties. And yes, 10 years to 20 years is not a long time. Some of us have been around for a lot longer than that. So we actually in the county started at 10 years because our bonds required that we had to have an ownership interest. The units had to be affordable for the life of the bonds. Well, we went from 10 years to 20 years to 30 years to 40 years really, really briefly. We are now at 50 years, but we are trying to get to perpetuity. One of the things that we're hoping to come out, will be coming out with the housing needs assessment is some recommendations for some longer term affordability. We'll let the county executive announce those at the appropriate time. But there's definitely 10 years, 20 years, 30 years even, it goes by in a flash. It really does. And then I agree, we've lost some of those units. However, not all of the families actually give up or sell those units just because their time is up because you know what? They don't have anywhere else where they can go because some of them still have limited income. Some have come back to us and actually asked us, can we file a new deed restriction on their property so it stays affordable for another 5 years at a time? Because because they're not in a position where they're ready to afford it. I actually can tell you a really quick story. I have a family right now that's in the midst of a divorce. The woman bought the unit herself. Her husband, she got married, he moved in. Well, they're now getting divorced. Well, their deed restriction, their affordability requirement ends in 3 years. He wants the value of the house be 3 years from now. The deed restriction is prevailing. That's thankfully for this woman, because she owned this house to begin with. But that's the sort of thing that we're protecting people with this. And she has made it clear. She made it clear to the court. We actually had to go in as expert witnesses about our deed restrictions. She made it clear to the court she could not afford to live anywhere else. And to her, this housing was just so precious. Even though she's lived there for 17 years now, she really needs that additional 3 years. And she may very well come back to us 3 years from now and say, please file a new deed restriction. So affordability, again, the term is amazing how fast it goes.
Any more questions? Yes. John.
One of the things that always fascinates me about the term affordability is it's really addresses the problems of people of limited incomes, not of people who are truly poor. And I worry, and I want to give me a second to elaborate on that. Even at 30% of AMI, a family has to have an income of $30,000 or more to be able to afford affordable housing. And one of the quips I always use is, affordable housing is that which we would aspire some to be able to afford. A significant proportion of the population, of the village at least, doesn't earn enough to get affordable housing. Permit me one more second. 2 years ago, Rhinebeck High School did a survey of clients of the CRC. They found a community resource center that works to call, we're always up here bemoaning our fate. We found that almost all reported, very few reported incomes of $30,000 a year. Most reported incomes between $10,000 and $30,000 a year. This is a big part of our population who faces also a huge housing problem. The proposal being brought out is wonderful. It addresses, it's astonishing. Oh, one more brief. If you want to understand the proposal, there's a very good PowerPoint, and I think it's on the village website. You can look at and lays out the rationale and the reasons behind it. And it addresses a very real problem. What I'm saying is it doesn't address the other problem. Okay, last comment. I sometimes worry about what I call the displacement paradox or the displacement conundrum. Affordable housing, if it becomes more prevalent, isn't going to go into shore acres. I don't think anyway. It's going to go into the areas which are already impoverished, where the housing prices and the land prices are lower. And I fear that what it will do is make the housing crisis for the very poor worse. Are there ways we can do to avoid that? I'm sorry for the long question.
Okay, you touched on a whole host of issues, so let me see if I can get to some of them. Number one, the issue of we're not really helping the poorest of the poor, okay? When we did the housing, I'm not at liberty to talk about the newest housing needs assessment, when we did the one back in 2004, the need for affordable housing in Westchester County was over 73,000 units. Of those, 53,000 of them related to families that needed rental assistance. But at the end of the day, you help that family maybe with $1,000 a month. I don't know what your average subsidy is. When we were running Section 8, it was about $1,100 something. Yeah, $1,100 a month. So at the end of the year, you've spent $1,100 for each of 12 months for every family that needs help. But you have no more affordable housing at the end of the day, which is why the county has always prioritized its resources to say we want to focus on building permanent new affordable housing rather than subsidizing that family. Because frankly, the Section 8 program, Housing Choice Voucher program, and other rental assistance programs that used to be hosted by and sponsored by the federal government are really meant to do that, are really meant to provide that rental assistance. And so we've really recognizing the county has limited resources, we have to be able to use bond proceeds to be able to do it. We have focused on building new affordable units. The need for rental assistance, all I can tell you is it's gone up. Okay, there's no question. The new housing needs assessment, that number's a lot bigger now, but that's all I can say about that. The last issue that where we're building it. One of the issues that came out of the housing settlement was the fact that so much of the county's affordable housing has been built in the areas that are already very low income and very minority and everything else. And so the court made us focus on those 31 municipalities that were the least diverse, generally those with less than 1% of African American population within the communities. So the 884 units that we've got in the works are all in those communities. It's not cheap. It's not easy. It's actually more expensive to do it. Can I tell you that the land value in the village of Rybrook was $110,000 just to buy the land per unit? For one unit, $110,000. I can buy land in Yonkers at $27,000 per unit, right, Jim? We can buy land a lot cheaper than that in other places. And the other thing, though, but one of the outcomes of the housing settlement was we had to create a centralized intake for people who can tell us that they want affordable housing, so that they can get told about the opportunities. And so we created our Home Seeker database. Home Seeker is a website online where you can go and find out about any of the county's affordable housing units that are taking applications right now. Actually, we host some of the other municipalities when they have units that we didn't necessarily participate in financially. There are over 16,000 families that have signed up on Home Seeker telling us that they want affordable housing, that they need affordable housing in Westchester County. Over 400 of these are not even in New York State. They're in all parts of the country, Kentucky, Virginia, Hawaii. There are people all over the country that want to move to Westchester for whatever reason. And our guess, I'll tell you, outside of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, the highest areas are Florida, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, which are very high retirement states. That tells us that it's potentially adults that might have lived here before, or their adult children live here and they may want to move back. So, it's interesting what these statistics can tell us. But so these, based on what this Home Seeker database tells us, this helps us, informs where we should be building affordable housing. And we ask people, where do you want to live? And we divide it by the 5 subregions in the county. So the Long Island Sound, northeastern Westchester, the Hudson River, central Westchester, or southern Westchester, which is only defined in Yonkers and Mount Vernon. What do you think is the most popular area where people want to live? Yonkers and Mount Vernon. Hands down. You know the least popular area? I hate to say it. It's the Long Island Sound. Oh my gosh, only like 12% want to live in the Long Island Sound. But it's like over 27% want to live in northern Westchester is second. Is second most popular. No, the second most popular. Second most popular. People, when we did a senior development, opened a senior development in Somers, we had over 800 applications for 74, 75 units. Yeah, no, there's a very strong interest in living. And again, partly because their adult children probably live up there. So yeah, so we are definitely working on providing units not in the most intensely built up areas. But I'm telling you, that is where people are looking for housing. So we don't want to avoid those areas. Right. The focus. Right. The point that the gentleman is continuing to make is the fact that the lowest of the low income, still, we are not building those units for them. So, and I don't disagree with you. I truly don't disagree with you. It's just a matter, there are some developers that are willing to go to those levels. West Hab, generally speaking, will go to the 30 and 40%, but the subsidies that are required then to make those units affordable, sometimes you can build 2 units for the cost of building 1. So it's a balancing act in terms of, what the county has to do.
Right. A few more questions we have. Jim, the gentleman in neon in the rear.
Jim Caloran.
Jim Caloran, it's good to be here. First of all, you can't get better than Norma in her expertise and her knowledge of planning and housing across. I'm so comfortable in this booth. But you know, just brainstorming, and it's good to meet the new village. We did our first home here on Weaver, ownership. I don't know if somebody anyone worked on that. I know John did, and which is great, and off of Laurel, and we helped with the disaster here. What if there was a creative solution where seniors could get tax abatement or break to put an accessory apartment on the back of their home? I'm just brainstorming here. Which would, so they got to, you know, because we give developers tax breaks and abatements. How, if we need to increase from what that gentleman was saying up on the corner to help, who are the people who are working and running our towns and cities? I mean, there's no question. I was in a Mamaroneck in a house with 4 apartments, and I'm sure 2 of them were illegal, and that is an affront to anyone that's sitting here. It's everywhere. So, you know, could we create is there an accessory apartment availability or to do that in the town and the village? And B, could you give seniors, do any seniors like a tax break here? Seniors a chance to have a tax break if they did that on their home for a number of years. I'm just brainstorming here because, you know, we're in a crisis. If Anna starts by saying, I got 10,000 people apply for Section 8, and you know, my head is going against the wall saying, oh, that's going to happen. And then this gentleman saying most of the people are 30,000 or under. And I don't know a lot of millennials making 90,000 and plus coming out of college. You know, we're in a real, and we're the most exited state. So I've just thrown out it as a creative solution. And we love retirees to come out and build with us. We have them do that every day. And thank you.
Could you identify yourself, please?
I'm Jim Kaloran with the Fuller Center. We used to be Habitat of Westchester. Now we can do New York City and Rockland and a broader area. I've been around for a long time with this neon shirt, though I do change it every day. Is that a possibility? Anything like that? Any ideas like that?
By the way, can I tell you that Jim is building 2 two-family homes, one right now in Chappaqua and one in Millwood. So he is definitely building units wherever we can find land. Go ahead, Jim.
I'm the least loved person in the town. But that's all right. We're taking an old church, and we have to think different. So if there are old churches or land, we have to think different on how we're going to develop. I even thought of houseboats in the Sound, which sounds crazy. But, you know, we have to think out of the box.
Sure. So in the single-family zones in the Village of Mamaroneck, you cannot do accessory dwelling. Is this okay? Is this better? In the single-family zones in the Village of Mamaroneck, you cannot do accessory dwelling units. I will stand. So the village is lucky to have in 1968 provided for 2-family and 4-family housing. The requirements in those districts, and those districts produce a lot of the middle class. It's not reaching to the lowest, but they do provide good middle class and lower income housing. But the requirements have changed a lot over the years as to what can be developed in those 2-family and 4-family zones. For example, in the R2F zone, you previously could have 2 families on a 5,000 square foot lot with a 50 by 100, 50 in the front, 50-foot frontage. That's been increased to 75. So now it's being encouraged that to do 2 families on one lot, you actually have to provide for a larger development, which is going to make it that much more expensive. So there's a lot of these little things that have incrementally built up over the years that make it more difficult to provide for housing that would typically be more accessible to lower income levels. So yeah, that's something that needs to be explored. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Helen Rosenberg. I'm on the board of the Washingtonville Housing Alliance, and for 18 years I worked for West Hab, which creates a lot of affordable housing in this county, and also in the Bronx and Manhattan. My question is for Norma. Everybody's talked about the incredibly high cost of land limiting the development of affordable housing, and the county does have a new homes land acquisition program which can help reduce the cost of land acquisition. And I'm wondering whether there are any plans to increase the amount of that program that's available for development.
Okay, so thank you, Helen, and it's been a long time. Wow. Can I tell you Odell Close is still around? Back in the early 90s, Helen with West Hab, or the Housing Partnership, created 3 units up in the town of North Salem that are still around, believe it or not. Actually, we're working on transferring it from one nonprofit to another. So there are definitely units that have been around for a long time. New Homes Land Acquisition, which is one of the county's 2 programs that we have for affordable housing funding. It's how the county can use its bonds to be able to work with developers. We actually buy the land at its value. It's no more than its appraised value. And then we sell the land to the developers for $1. That takes the cost of land out of the equation for those affordable housing developers, because land is generally not eligible for any of the state's financing programs. And so I did bring with me this. One of the reasons I stopped at the office this morning was to give you some sense of all the developments that we have going in place since Mr. Latimer took office, because it was very important for him to be able to say, Mr. Astorino was responsible for these units, but this is what I'm responsible for. And so I can tell you, since January 1st, 2018, using New Homes Land and the other program, which is Housing Implementation Fund, that the county has now approved financing for over 500 units of new affordable housing. Now, none of them have a shovel in the ground yet, because it just takes that long to get the state's financing in place. But we have another 219 units that hopefully is going to go to the County Planning Board in June, and then to the Board of Legislators, and then another 588 units in my pipeline. So New Homes Land is alive and well. We are absolutely using that program pretty regularly. Matter of fact, this year I'm probably going to hit about $25 million worth of, a lot more than the $5 million that was allocated for this year, but there's a couple of years of back years of funding available. Where affordable housing wasn't necessarily a priority, except for those units that we had to do. So anyway, so yeah, we're definitely still using those programs and working on a ton of units.
Well, oh, one more question. Last question, sir.
I'll speak up. I'm Larry Thal from the town of Mamaroneck. Many years ago, I worked in the Housing and Urban Development Office of General Counsel when I thought about a law career. And there was a lot of new things back then. There was CBGB, that was a disco, but there was CDGB, the Community Development Crop. Had to keep them distinct. But here's my question. When you have your list of wait lists, right, are there other factors besides percentage of median income involved? For instance, I'm sure there are credit checks, criminal check, things like that. But are there also indicia of someone who's going to be a participant in the community? Someone who's done things, like what other things are involved besides their place in line when people are chosen?
Okay, so we require, with the Housing Choice Voucher Program in particular, we require a lot of documentation. We look at credit reports, we look at income, we verify everything. The county has a number of laws, basically, that prevent people from being discriminated against based on things like source of income. So a housing voucher is considered a source of income, and landlords can't discriminate against someone for that. What we are finding now, however, is there's always a loophole and there's always another way, is that they're looking at credit score. And as most most people, if you're buying a house or you're looking for an apartment, they're going to look for ask you for a credit check and do all that work. So I think that's one of the obstacles that we're facing now, and I think that that's something that needs to be looked at countywide.
All right, let me just add to that for the county's programs. Since 2005, the county has had an affirmative fair housing marketing plan requirement in place that tells developers right up front, where they can tell everybody, this is how we are going to choose the tenants for our buildings, okay? The owners, tenants, whatever it's going to be. So this affirmative fair housing marketing plan sets the stage. According to the housing settlement, it got broadened. We now have to market for each of our developments into the 9 counties, Westchester County and its contiguous counties, including the 5 boroughs, the 5 counties of New York City. So the 9 counties are Fairfield, Putnam, Rockland, Westchester, and then the 5 counties of New York City. So all of our developments have to be marketed in those 5 counties. But we start with who lives in the circle around, we draw a circle around the property where we're doing affordable housing, a circle of at least 5,000 people, and look at the demographics to see who lives there. Because what we want to know is who doesn't live there. Who is the least likely to apply in the developments? And you can imagine when I'm looking at Portchester or Mount Vernon, it's going to be a very different population of who lives in that area than when I'm looking at North Salem or Somers or someplace, Yorktown, someplace in northern Westchester. So we always have to start with who's the least likely to apply, who doesn't live there now. And that's the focus of the developers' marketing. They have to do extra marketing to the populations that don't already live there, whether it's Asian, Hispanic, African American. In Mount Vernon, it's going to be white, believe it or not. It all depends on who's not the priority of who doesn't, or the presence of who does not live there now. But when the county also requires that developers have to hold a lottery, so there's an even playing field for anybody can submit an application to any affordable housing development, to any unit, for some period of time, either 90 days or 120 days, depending upon the size of the development. And then at the end of that time period, everybody who applied is notified of the date and location of the public lottery. It's usually sometimes in a village or town hall, sometimes in a library, sometimes in a school. But there is a public lottery that's conducted, and that establishes the order of who gets looked at first, whether they qualify for the unit. But I'll tell you, some of the most successful integrations of people are those that have communities, that have housing boards, that have networks of people who come in and welcome these new residents. There's a new development in Ardsley. The Ardsley Village Board went out, some of their members, they had a barbecue on Labor Day, September. They had a barbecue to welcome the residents to the village. That was super. I mean, they all felt included. It gave them an opportunity to learn, to meet some of the elected officials. So it depends. Bedford does that for its residents because they have a housing board. So it does depend on how the local community works to welcome these people into the community. And that also encourages them to get involved as well.
Terrific. Unfortunately, it's 9 o'clock. It went very quickly, but I think the point has been made as though, what do they say? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. All the good intentions in the world still have to deal with the minutia of getting the job done. And so our 3 panelists are working very, very hard at getting the job done. And we want to sincerely thank you for coming and thank you for doing what you're doing.
I want to thank you all. I also want to thank the panelists. Thank you for coming, and this is the last of our meetings for this year. We hope you join us again in September and have a wonderful summer. Thank you for coming.